Welcome back to our deep dive into revolutions. Before we jumped into all the theories and academic stuff, we were talking about all the different flavors of revolutions.
Right, like each revolution is unique in its own
Yeah,
way.
the Wikipedia article mentions tons of them, from the American Revolution to the Arab Spring.
Oh yeah, it's like a greatest hits album of historical upheaval.
And each of these revolutions had different goals and outcomes.
Of course.
Some aimed for more democratic governments, while others focused on economic systems or national independence.
It really just depends on the context, right?
Right, like the American Revolution.
Right.
Where the goal was independence from British rule, or the French Revolution, where people wanted to get rid of the monarchy and create a republic. Both were focused on big political changes.
Right.
But then you have revolutions like the Russian Revolution, which went beyond just getting rid of the Tsar.
Exactly. The Russian Revolution led to the creation of the first communist state. A huge shift that had a massive ripple effect on global politics and ideology throughout the 20th century.
And speaking of global impact, we can't forget about all the decolonization revolutions that happened in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean in the mid-20th century.
Oh yeah, those are huge.
These movements completely changed the world map and shifted the balance of power on an international scale.
And those decolonization revolutions were often about more than just political independence. They were also about social justice and economic equality. The goal was to create a whole new society that was fairer for everyone.
So it's not always a clear separation between political, economic, and social goals.
Right. They're all interconnected.
Yeah, revolutions are complex, a little bit of everything mixed together.
I like to think of it as a multi-flavored candy.
Okay.
With different goals and motivations all swirled together. And just like with those candies, the outcomes of revolutions can be unexpected.
Yeah.
Sometimes they lead to the positive changes people were hoping for, but often they result in unforeseen consequences, and sometimes even new forms of oppression.
It's like choosing your own adventure. You think you're heading toward a happy ending, but then one decision leads you down a completely different path. And who knows where you'll end up?
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Take the French Revolution, for example.
Ah, yes, the classic example of how revolutions can take unexpected turns.
It started with those inspiring ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But it also gave rise to the Reign of Terror, a period of extreme violence and political repression.
Which is so interesting because it wasn't just a random turn of events. The instability inherent in revolutionary periods, the power vacuums, the clashing ideologies, the fear and uncertainty can create an environment where violence and extremism flourish.
That's a good reminder that even when revolutions have good intentions, the path to a better future can be very rocky.
It's definitely not a smooth ride.
And even if some goals are achieved, building a new order after the revolution can be just as difficult as the revolution itself.
Absolutely. It's not just about tearing down the old system. It's about creating something new and stable in its place.
Think of it like trying to rebuild a house after a major earthquake.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You might have some blueprints and some salvaged materials, but there are going to be a lot of gaps to fill, and you'll probably have to improvise along the way.
And just like with rebuilding a house, there are going to be disagreements about how to proceed.
Right. There are always competing visions for what the new society should look like, who should be in charge, and how things should be run.
And this is where we see that tension that Douglas North talked about between rapid political change and the much slower pace of changing cultural norms and habits.
So those deep-seated ways of thinking and doing things can make it really hard to create truly lasting change, even after a revolution.
It's a process that takes time and effort.
And navigating those challenges often involves a lot of negotiation, compromise, and sometimes even backtracking on some of the initial revolutionary goals.
Yeah, sometimes you have to adjust your plans along the way.
Sometimes this leads to a new system that incorporates elements of both the old and the new, a kind of hybrid that tries to balance competing interests.
Makes sense.
In other cases, this tension can lead to further instability, new forms of authoritarianism, or even civil war, as different groups struggle for control.
It can be a very delicate balance.
It seems like finding a way to create lasting stability after a revolution is one of the biggest challenges.
It definitely is.
And there's no single answer, no magic formula. It often comes down to factors specific to each revolution: the historical context, the cultural values, the political landscape, and the decisions made by those in power.
It's a complex interplay of factors.
And it's important to remember that revolutions are about more than just abstract political or economic ideas.
Right, they involve real people.
They involve real people. who experience these upheavals in very personal
Right.
and profound ways.
Think about the individuals who participated in the Boston Tea Party, or the women who marched on Versailles, demanding bread and challenging the French monarchy.
Those are some powerful images.
These are stories of ordinary people who, for whatever reason, decide that they can't just sit back and accept the status quo anymore. They're willing to take risks, to stand up for what they believe in, even if it means putting themselves in danger.
It takes a lot of courage to be a revolutionary, to face down those in power, especially when the outcome is so uncertain.
It's a leap of faith in many ways.
And their stories aren't just about grand historical events. They're about the human desire for a better world, for justice, equality, and freedom.
And while it's important to celebrate those acts of courage and to recognize the potential for positive change that revolutions represent, we also can't shy away from the darker side of these events.
Right.
Revolutions often bring violence, suffering, and loss. They disrupt lives, tear apart families, and leave lasting scars on societies.
It's a reminder that revolution is a double-edged sword. It has the power to create a new world, but often at a steep price.
And that's why studying revolutions is so crucial. We need to understand them in all their complexity, the motivations, the processes, the triumphs, and the failures. By learning from the past, we can hopefully navigate the challenges of change more effectively in the future.
So we've seen that revolutions are driven by a variety of factors, but one of the most powerful forces is the power of ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Ideas can be incredibly powerful.
What are some of the big ideas that have fueled revolutions throughout history?
Oh, the list is long and varied. From nationalism to republicanism, from egalitarianism to self-determination, from human rights to democracy, from liberalism to socialism. Revolutions have drawn inspiration from a whole spectrum of ideologies.
Okay.
These ideas reflect the grievances, aspirations, and beliefs of those who embrace them.
So ideas like reason and individual liberty, popular during the Enlightenment, fueled the American and French revolutions.
Yes, those were very influential ideas at the time.
These ideas challenged the traditional power structures and offered a new vision for how society could be organized.
It was a paradigm shift.
Exactly. And then you have Marxist ideas about class struggle and the exploitation of workers, which inspired communist revolutions in places like Russia, China, and Cuba. These revolutions aimed to create a more egalitarian society by redistributing wealth and power.
A very different vision for society.
And in the 20th century, the idea of national self-determination was central to the many anti-colonial revolutions, particularly in Africa and Asia.
Right.
People who had been living under colonial rule fought to regain control of their own destiny and build their own independent nations.
It was a powerful wave of decolonization.
These movements were a powerful rejection of European imperialism and fundamentally reshaped the political map of the world.
And it's interesting how revolutionary ideas can spread across borders, influencing movements in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
The French Revolution, for example, had a huge impact on other European countries, sparking a wave of revolutionary activity. And the success of the Russian Revolution inspired communist movements around the globe.
It's like revolutionary ideas have a life of their own.
They do.
They travel, they adapt, and they inspire new generations of activists and revolutionaries.
And just as the meaning of the word revolution evolved over time, so too have these revolutionary ideas been interpreted and reinterpreted to fit different contexts.
That's a key point. It's not just about copying and pasting ideas from one revolution to another. It's about taking inspiration, adapting those ideas to fit specific circumstances, and even challenging and modifying them as new situations arise.
Revolutions are not static. They're dynamic.
So even within a revolution, there can be debates and disagreements about the best way to achieve those goals.
Absolutely. Revolutions are rarely a single, unified movement. They usually involve coalitions of different groups, each with their own specific interests and interpretations of those big overarching ideas.
It's like trying to cook a meal with a group of friends who all have different tastes and opinions.
I like that analogy.
You might agree on the main course, but there will be disagreements about the side dishes, the spices, and how long to cook.
Exactly. And those differences can lead to tensions, factions, and even splits within revolutionary movements. The French Revolution is a prime example of this. What began as a somewhat united front against the monarchy eventually fractured into competing factions with very different visions for the future, leading to internal conflicts and power struggles. These divisions often stem from different interpretations of core values, like freedom, equality, and justice. What one group sees as essential to a just society, another might view as a threat or a betrayal of the revolution's goals.
So managing those internal tensions is crucial for any revolution to succeed.
It's all about finding a way to work together despite those differences.
And that's where leadership comes into play. Strong and effective leadership can sometimes help bridge those divides, keep a movement focused on its goals, and provide a sense of direction during times of chaos and uncertainty.
It can be a very challenging role.
Okay, so let's talk about those revolutionary leaders. Throughout history, we've seen a diverse cast of characters leading revolutions.
Why?
Figures like George Washington, Robespierre, Lenin Dem, Mao Zedong, Fidel Castro, Nelson Mandela, and so many others.
It's a fascinating mix of personalities, each with their own unique style, strategies, and impact on history.
Some, like George Washington, were military leaders who rallied their troops and led them to victory against powerful adversaries. Others, like Lenin, were master strategists and thinkers who shaped revolutionary movements behind the scenes.
They were the brains of the operation.
And then you have leaders like Nelson Mandela, who spent decades imprisoned for their beliefs, but emerged as symbols of hope and resilience, ultimately leading their nations through peaceful transitions to more just and equitable societies.
There were beacons of hope.
And the roles these leaders played varied tremendously, depending on the specific revolution.
Of course.
Some, like Robespierre, rose to prominence during moments of intense turmoil, while others, like Fidel Castro, led guerrilla movements that slowly gained momentum over time.
It's all about adapting to the situation.
Thinking about all these different leaders, it strikes me that there are so many different paths to revolutionary leadership.
There really are.
There's no single mold, no one-size-fits-all approach.
You're absolutely right. What's important is understanding how these leaders navigated the challenges and opportunities of their specific time and place, how they mobilized their followers, and how their decisions shaped the course of events.
It's also important to remember that these leaders, even the iconic ones, were still human beings with their own strengths, weaknesses, and complexities.
They weren't perfect.
They weren't perfect. They made mistakes, faced setbacks, and sometimes even contradicted their own ideals.
And by recognizing their flaws, we gain a deeper understanding of both the challenges and the possibilities of revolutionary leadership.
It's a reminder that even in moments of great upheaval, human fallibility is always a factor. And that power, even when wielded with good intentions, can be a corrupting force.
Power can be a double-edged sword.
So we've explored the many different faces of revolutions, from their goals and outcomes to the ideas and leaders that shape them.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've seen how they can be both destructive and transformative, and how they often involve a complex interplay of political, social, and economic forces.
But at the heart of every revolution is the human story. The stories of individuals who choose to stand up and demand change.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore these human stories and try to understand what it was actually like to live through a revolution.